lessons stayed. He fought every demon he had, and he still came back. Down in Martinsburg, the city's getting cold. Dad was on the corner with a story untold. Battled every morning, but he still got out. Helped another stranger, made another route. The bottle was a teacher, but it never won. He poured the coffee, opened up the lotto one, and one became 100 and 100 became more. Even when his body couldn't carry what he bore. And they asked me why he fought so hard. Tell them it was love. And they asked me how he kept the law. Tell them it was love. He was fighting, still fighting demons no one saw. He was teaching, still teaching, even broken on the floor. Now the addictions let him go, and the legacy keeps the flow. Daddy, you can rest at last. I'm carrying the future, not the past.
Welcome everybody to day 2 of Inside the Karmelo Anthony trial. Now, this is coming out on the big news. We're not going to show it yet. That'll come after we get done going over what occurred. But I'm going to acknowledge it that the judge this past Friday released the footage that the public had yet to see, and that footage is very important. Now, I'm going to include that in the analysis section. I promised you weekly inside stuff here on the case as far as going into each day of the case, and we're going to continue to do this weekly. But when we get to the analysis, we will absolutely take a look at some of what it means. And maybe play it where it's relevant as we're walking through this trial and what happened in this trial. But we are now at day 2. So we just came off day 1, if you recall. The coach ended day 1. They admitted the jacket, which I said was, to me, concerning, because I felt like that was a bit prejudicial to understand why the jacket needed to come in. But I will tell you this, though, from what I saw in that video, I don't think you can necessarily, I don't think it supports total exoneration, and I don't think it supports necessarily where the case landed. I think it hits right in between, like I've said from day 1, that this case was a case that should have been, first of all, it should have been acknowledged here that there was more to this, in the sense that there's no way you're going to say that this young man went there to act with the intent to kill somebody. Okay, I don't believe that. But I do believe that when this thing escalated and things were done, something worse than self-defense happened. But we'll get there. So anyways, let's kick this off, as we've been doing, with the video that we're going to watch to tell us what happened inside day 2, and then we will break it down.
On June 5, 2026, the murder trial of 19-year-old Karmelo Anthony resumed at the Collin County Courthouse in McKinney, Texas. Judge John Roach Jr. strictly enforced a total media blackout and a judicial gag order. Inside the room, the gallery was limited to just 27 public seats, creating a tightly controlled, high-tension atmosphere. Anthony sat at the defense table as a former student athlete and track captain. His fate now rested on how a jury of 12 strangers would interpret his history as a competitor against the reality of the evidence. With cameras barred from the room, the jury had to rely on the weight of raw physical evidence and sensory testimony to differentiate between a senseless murder and a claim of self-defense. During his opening argument, District Attorney Bill Werski defined the fatal stabbing at the Frisco ISD track meet as an unprovoked and senseless act. Defense attorney Mike Howard presented a different framework, portraying Anthony as an honor student who acted only to defend his own life. While the defense focused on Anthony's grades and character, their opening statement did not address why he was in possession of a folding knife at the stadium that afternoon. The testimony on day 2 would serve as the first stress test for these two conflicting legal promises. The state's first witness of the day was firefighter paramedic Neil Adams, who arrived at David Kuykendall Stadium to treat 17-year-old Austin Metcalf. Witnesses described the weather as heavy rain. Adams testified that the conditions forced his team to move a nearby school tent to establish a clean scene for their life-saving efforts. Adams provided a clinical assessment of Metcalf's condition. His skin was gray, his pupils fixed and dilated, with no pulse when paramedics arrived. This testimony anchored the proceedings in the physical outcome of the confrontation, moving the trial past the abstract theories of the opening statements. The prosecution then called Officer Eduardo Cortez, one of the first responders to secure Anthony at the north end of the track. The jury heard body cam audio where Anthony is recorded saying, "I'm not alleged, I did it." Within that same recording, Anthony is heard claiming that Metcalf was the physical aggressor, repeating that he had warned the victim not to touch him. As he was being placed into a patrol vehicle, Anthony asked the officer if Metcalf was going to be okay. These spontaneous admissions gave the prosecution a direct confession of the act, but they also gave the jury the first piece of evidence supporting Anthony's claim of self-defense. Through the testimony of Officer Jacob Shawls and criminalist Stefani Martin, the state mapped the recovery of physical evidence from the bleachers. 8 to 9 rows above the scene of the struggle, investigators found Anthony's Centennial High School backpack. 3 to 4 rows above the crime tape, they recovered the 5-inch folding knife used in the stabbing. The jury watched body cam footage showing Metcalf's body as an officer announced the discovery of the weapon. The moment was intense enough that one juror was seen crying as the court went to recess. The introduction of the bloody weapon shifted the focus from the medical aftermath to the specific mechanics of the stabbing. In the afternoon, student-athlete eyewitnesses began testifying about the escalation under the Memorial High School tent. Defense attorney Toby Shook used a chair in the middle of the courtroom to recreate the spatial dynamics of the fight. Shook sat while a witness acted as Metcalf, leaning in to push the attorney, demonstrating the exact moment the blade was used. This demonstration forced the jury to confront the physical geometry of the struggle, a seated teenager looking up at a larger, standing opponent. The day's final testimony came from a student who heard Anthony warn his teammates, "If you want me to move, you're going to have to move me." By the end of day 2, the state had presented the weapon and a confession, while the defense had established the physical provocation that led to the strike. The jury's central question was no longer about who committed the act, but whether that act was a proportional response to being pushed. As court adjourned at 5:05 p.m., the trial remained balanced on the legal distinction between murder and self-defense.
All right, so there you have it, guys. That's the video of what happened on day 2. Now we're going to break this down a little bit more. But what you heard there is essentially they saw the body camera footage. Now this footage was released on Friday, okay? And the whole in public, well, some of it has been released. They did not release any footage that showed Austin Metcalf or any of that information. What they released was the footage showing the incident, showing Karmelo Anthony's arrest, and his statement where he said it's not alleged. But what I walked away from watching that is I did not see a kid who had just committed an intentional crime. I saw a kid who was scared, who maybe had obviously brought too much force into a scenario that maybe didn't require it. But he had taken action, and then he was scared, and that's what I saw. I did not see somebody who what the jury did in this case, which is convict him of a willful, intentional act that was intending to kill this man or this young man. This was a scenario where action was taken, and this action was far in excess to the force being used, in the sense that Austin Metcalf was physically simply trying to push him or remove him, and Anthony stabs him. Now, the question, of course, comes into is because, and again, the entire case, as we talked about in day one, comes down to provocation. Did Karmelo Anthony provoke the incident and therefore take away the ability to stand his ground? Because, and again, let's get into this and take the day as it comes. So, obviously, no cell phone, no recording. So here's the witnesses that came in the morning that we're going to go through. Neil Adams, Frisco firefighter paramedic. Officer Eduardo Cortez, Frisco PD, he's the arresting officer. Officer Jacob Shawls and criminalist Stephanie Martin, they were the forensics. They collected the knife, they collected the backpack. Then 1 to 5 p.m. is all of the eyewitnesses from that were the kids, essentially, that were under the tent. So let's talk about what Neil Adams says. Neil Adams says, he comes and tells the jury. He recounts ordering that the school tent needs to be moved to create a triage area and a perimeter in the heavy rain because it's raining. Now remember, the rain is significant because the rain is the reason why Karmelo Anthony was under the tent. And one of the factors that came up in day one was, why was Karmelo Anthony under the tent? Karmelo Anthony was under the tent, according to Karmelo Anthony, and again, I still stand by the very problematic issue, which was that Karmelo Anthony never told his story. And I don't believe the statement he made to the police should have prevented him from getting on the stand to tell the story. I think that is what was missing in this case for the jury to really understand what was happening. But he doesn't get on the stand and tell the story. But through his defense attorney, they communicate through their questioning and through the information that's presented through the witnesses that there was no place for Karmelo Anthony to go because his team did not have an actual tent. So he ended up under that tent because his team didn't have a tent. Now, the other kids, the people that were upset that he was there, had no knowledge of that. So they're just seeing something that they think is not normal. They don't know why he's there. And they do what kids do, and things escalate the way they escalate. But according to Neil Adams, Austin Metcalf's pupils were fixed, dilated, he was gray, no respirations, and he did not have a pulse. CPR had been initiated, blood transfusions were done in the ambulance, and he never regains consciousness. Now, this is the layout here of how everything occurs. And if you've watched the video, again, we will watch this video eventually. But based on what was presented in court, and this is exactly what was seen in the video, you're going to see Officer Cortez notice that blood's visible on Anthony's left middle finger. Anthony is captured and detained without any resistance at the fence line. I've seen the video. I've seen his detention. And it's over. He literally leaves the tent, and Karmelo Anthony was attempting to exit the stadium. And then eventually he's and again, day one, we heard from the teacher who found him and got him and gave him a hug. And then he eventually, when confronted by Officer Cortez, puts his hands up and he's taken into custody, and then he's immediately taken outside of the stadium to a police car. Now, a couple things to note. He does make the statement about it's not alleged, but he also inquires, is Austin Metcalf okay? Is he going to survive? That does not sound like a young man who thinks he killed somebody. That sounds like a young man who used a knife in a questionable circumstance, stabbed him, fled the scene because he was concerned that everyone in that tent was going to attempt to, again, remember, he stabs this kid because he's got multiple people. And it is clear that there were multiple people over near Anthony when this happens. There's a clear scuffle. The knife is used, and then he leaves. And he moves and gets the heck out of there and immediately tries to leave because he understands that there's a group of angry people that are angry at him who've escalated this into a physical confrontation to which he settled with the knife. And again, that's the issue that's at hand with the jury that says, was that okay? And were the circumstances and the things being said? I think when you look at what was supposed to be the provoking language and you look at it in the context of a kid faced with all of the realities of being a 16, 17-year-old kid in that scenario, you start what might appear to be provocation is really actually his attempt to try to de-escalate the situation, as wrong-headed and as short-sighted as it was. That's my opinion. This jury didn't obviously agree with that. And this jury was not given the benefit of trying to properly understand it because they were not allowed to hear from Karmelo Anthony. And I believe there should have been experts brought in to talk about how an adolescent mind, an underdeveloped brain, reacts in these scenarios where they're being essentially called out in front of others. And that when they say certain things, these things are not necessarily being said because that's what they mean. Now, Exhibit A, spontaneous admission, what we were just talking about. Officer Cortez says, I have the alleged suspect detained in blank and handcuffs. Karmelo Anthony then, unprompted, says in a highly emotional way, and it's true, it was a highly emotional way, he says, I'm not alleged, I did it. He put his hands on me. I told him not to. Is he going to be okay? And defense attorney Toby Shook uses the exact video on cross-examination to establish that Anthony was fully compliant, not attempting to flee, and exhibiting genuine, unfeigned distress. And that's important because what is the sole thing on trial right now in this case is Karmelo Anthony's mind and what he's thinking, what he's doing, and how he's reacting in these scenarios that he can't manufacture this. He's in a distressful situation. He's being taken into police custody. He's not going to be sitting here being able to manufacture these responses. So that's important. So next, the weapon is found by Officer Scholes. Officer Scholes testifies. Officer Scholes finds the weapon 3 to 4 rows up. It's a 3.5-inch blade. It's found half open with blood visible on the blade. They find the backpack 8 to 9 rows up, blue Centennial High School bag, snacks, a hair pick, phone cord, car keys, word finder puzzles, and a cross necklace. The sweatshirt, which gets processed by criminalist Stephanie Miller. It's a gray cotton sweatshirt containing a single minute red stain. Now, these are the evidence pieces this is the evidence that's found at the scene. What I would ask you to look at is that backpack. Does that backpack sound like something that is being packed by a killer who is coming to this tent to provoke a confrontation that's going to result in use of a knife? And I would tell you, I don't believe it. So the physical evidence here that we have, you've got the 3.5-inch knife. The idea here is, the state's narrative is that he brings a concealed lethal weapon to a school event, which is illegal. So the 3.5, apologize there for the interruption, guys. No, but I had a little one pop in here, but 3.5-inch knife. So we'll go over the dual interpretations of the physical evidence. And again, one thing I want you to, and again, the jury obviously made their conclusions, but I want you to understand this. State's narrative, 3.5-inch knife, brought the idea here is he brings a concealed lethal weapon to a school event, illegal. Defense says, used in a single targeted defensive motion, not brandished or swung wildly. The problem with one thing you need to understand about the knife and the reason the significance about bringing a concealed weapon and it being illegal is that there's a couple of reasons. There are a couple of things that would cancel out your right to stand your ground. One of them is to ask and to essentially assert self-defense. One of them is if you're involved in an illegal activity, you don't get to assert it. And the defense went an extra mile here because they went out of their way. They actually called a witness, a police officer, to come in and testify that, in fact, bringing that knife into on school grounds. If this would have happened at school, inside the school building, it would have been illegal. It would have been a felony in Texas to do this. At this particular event, it's not illegal to possess it. So the defense was splitting hairs here, saying, well, it's not technically illegal, so therefore he doesn't automatically lose self-defense. The whole point of it is that the self-defense argument is that what was the purpose of the knife? Again, Karmelo Anthony could have spoken to that. Why the defense would, again, that alone was something that made Karmelo Anthony's testimony all the more important. And understanding why that knife was there. When they didn't let Karmelo Anthony testify, it essentially stands that the state can sit there and argue and make it a contested fact that, hey, he brought a concealed lethal weapon to a school event and tried to conceal it. The defense essentially just simply tries to split hairs and say, well, it's not technically an illegal weapon. That's not a great argument. What would be a better argument is he didn't bring it as a weapon. He brought it for some other purpose. And again, as I mentioned in day one, there is a purpose that you could have for a knife, or, one purpose is you cleaning your cleats. Secondarily, bringing a folding knife necessarily and having it in a backpack of other stuff doesn't necessarily on its own mean, when you look at all the other items he had, this is an everyday carry. He's going to a stadium. He's not thinking about bringing it for purposes of hurting anyone. But when he is confronted and he ends up in this confrontation, he reaches for it because he knows it's there. Not because he brought it there to use it, but he brought it there because, hey, there's this confrontation that's happening and it happens to be in his bag. He could have explained that. The other deal, the backpack and its contents. The state says he uses it to conceal the weapon for a sneak attack, which I think is totally ridiculous. The defense says it's routine teenage items, snacks, puzzles, proving no predatory intent. And I think that is very strong. The problem is you need Karmelo Anthony to come in and explain that and say, look, this backpack is not being brought to conceal a deadly weapon, which I think is totally ridiculous. Where's the motive? Why would he enter a tent and decide, I'm going to do this? I'm just going to come in here just for the fun of stabbing someone. And you don't see him react. That was the point of the defense playing that video, which, again, has been released. We will eventually watch it, of the body cam footage of Karmelo Anthony's arrest when he's emotional, he's upset, he's scared. And he's asking, he's going to survive, he's going to make it, right? The sweatshirt stain puts Anthony in immediate, undeniable proximity to the bleeding victim. The tiny size of the stain proves a split-second defensive encounter, not prolonged aggressive combat. So the defense looks at this as proving that this was not some scenario where, again, if Karmelo Anthony was intending to kill somebody, he doesn't stab him once, he stabs him multiple times. And the amount, so the defense uses it as a lie. Again, all of these things could have been much better presented if Karmelo Anthony would have been testifying to them and saying, this was my intent, this is what I was doing, this is what was happening. And then the state has to disprove these things beyond a reasonable doubt. And by not putting Karmelo Anthony's account into the record, it allows the state to argue these things as definitive evidence, unrefuted by the defendant. And then the state, and then the jury can do what they did in this case and go ahead and adopt the absolute worst case scenario for all three of these things. And that's exactly what they did. Now, the other issue that came up in the testimony, once they got done with the police officers, they came out with the eyewitnesses, is that Austin Metcalf and his teammates were towering over Anthony because, again, as we heard, they put a chair in the middle of the courtroom to demonstrate what was going on, to demonstrate as they called it, the geometry of the confrontation. In other words, 130 pounds, 5'8", Karmelo Anthony is seated. You've got 6'2" athletes 50 to 60 pounds heavier over top of Karmelo Anthony. And one thing I will tell you is when you watch that video, it's very grainy, it's hard to see. What you can see is that there are multiple people surrounding Karmelo Anthony, and there is some sort of confrontation. There's a seated individual, there's a standing individual, and there's a confrontation where they come together, and then things happen. And then Karmelo Anthony flees the tent. And he's fleeing the tent because he knows that he's been confronted physically by these individuals, physically by them. And he had to use his knife. And again, the question at that particular juncture is, did he provoke it? And if you put all this together and you go, okay, Karmelo Anthony is in this tent. And again, I would challenge, I've seen the comments come through. I would challenge each of you to think to yourself and to put yourself not in your own perspective of wherever you're at in your life, not with all of your life history, but as a teenager who's being called out by his peers for being somewhere that he believes he has a right to be. They don't believe he has a right to be. They're threatening him. They're telling him. How does a teenager resolve that? Well, they don't resolve that by looking weak, and that's the problem. So what does he do? He throws out a threat that says something to the effect of, touch me and see what happens. That is a common threat that's thrown out many, many times throughout all high schools everywhere. Karmelo Anthony, at this point, clearly connects with himself to know that he's got this folding knife here, and he's basically letting them know, if you think you're going to come, if you're going to come physically try to remove me from the tent, I'm okay to be here. There's no reason why I can't be here. I'm here for a real reason. I'm here with my friends. I'm here talking to my friend. Leave me alone, guys. And they want him out. So what happens? They escalate this. And the question at that point, who's escalating what? Karmelo Anthony, is that statement, touch me and see what happens? Is that escalation or de-escalation? The state says, oh, he wants to end his life today and stab a kid in front of everybody and end another kid's life today. So he's trying to get this situation to happen. I don't take it that way. And I think someone who is aware of how teens interact and the way the teen mind works, that's an impulsive statement said in a moment to try to salvage their own position, to make themselves not look weak, but at the same time say, get away from me and leave me alone. And that's what they're basically saying. Austin Metcalf at that point, which we have removed all responsibility of Austin Metcalf to say, what's he supposed to do in that instance? And I guess what the jury adopted is that it's okay for Austin Metcalf to advance past that and then provoke Anthony. See, my concern with this case is we all stop right there. He says that statement. But Austin Metcalf encloses the space, comes into Anthony's space. That's very clear. And that is a provoking act. And he basically says, try me, dude. I'm going to fit. And then he goes and puts hands on Anthony. Now, when Anthony responds with a knife stab, there's a problem there because there is a difference in the force being used. But the question becomes, should Anthony completely say, well, self-defense doesn't exist? How did Anthony view this moment when Austin Metcalf is now coming on him? The state has actually asked the jury, and the jury, for some reason, adopted the idea that, yeah, Anthony came in there with a concealed weapon, provoked a confrontation, and stabbed Austin Metcalf because he just decided he wanted to go do 35 years in prison or maybe life in prison, and that's what his goal was for that day. That is ridiculous. And I questioned the jurors' thought process on how they got there. I don't know. I don't believe they would have got there if Karmelo Anthony would have got on the stand and showed real emotion and explained himself and said, wait a minute, this is what I was doing. This is what was happening. This is how this went down. I was scared out of my mind. I had people, big people, and I made a terrible mistake. And even if you go, okay, well, self-defense gets erased because you used a knife versus fists. And self-defense is not stabbing someone when someone's going to, at worst at this point, maybe physically beat you up. And, again, in this case, it was not an idea that he was going to die, but he would have been defending against great bodily harm. The question is, how much bodily harm do you think Austin Metcalf would have actually given upon him, or these people would have given? And again, that's for a juror, for someone to decide. You got, if it would have led to 3 or 4 people beating on him, he could have gotten really beat up. But that moment, that provocation, we are leaving it at Karmelo Anthony's statement and erasing the fact that Austin Metcalf walked across there. What we can't erase, though, is that different. What should have been the only decision between this jury was we acknowledge the fact that the provocation came from Austin Metcalf when he overrode what was basically an ask from Karmelo Anthony. Please back off and let me stay in my, don't make me look weak. Don't make me appear weak. Austin Metcalf essentially said, dude, you're weak. I don't care and I'm not afraid of you. And he moves across and he becomes the provocateur. He challenges him. So I don't think you should be able to erase, I don't think that you should say, well, what Austin Metcalf did in this situation is just completely erased by what Karmelo Anthony said. And then the stab happens. And what should have been a decision here is this, to me, is a decision of, is this manslaughter or is this something else? In my opinion, we fall on the lesser charge that lands between 0 years and 2 years in 0 and 2 years in prison. That's where I feel like this should have been a pull and a tug between that and looking at it and saying, how much culpability does Karmelo Anthony need? How much punishment does Karmelo Anthony need for the impulsive decision to stab someone? And the defense then could have gotten into the mind of a teen. And at that point, they could have really pushed forward into the whole idea of, hey, Karmelo Anthony is a teenager who made a really bad decision that resulted in someone's death. And it's the brain. It's the problematic way a teenage brain, an undeveloped brain, deals with these situations. And it's also the problematic way other teenagers react to each other. And to me, 35 years, that's crazy for this situation. 2 years, 5 years, those are all on the table, right? And Karmelo Anthony taking responsibility on the stand, acknowledging that what he did was acknowledging that the death, he's sad for the death, but that he fully believes he was defending himself. It could have landed in self-defense. He could have potentially got a jury to see it. And when you see this, look at this picture that's up on this screen. Look at the disparity in size. Understand that when you remove the idea that the only way when you remove that idea that Karmelo Anthony was trying to provoke someone to come over to him, and you understand what he was really doing, because that's what I really firmly believe, and that's just from understanding being in high school myself and being around high school kids and through my sons, and understanding the way what I've looked into and heard in my own coverage of cases. And talked to my dad about this because my dad defended kids who did stupid things like this, fights and things of that nature. And there is truly a large amount of, and then my wife, on the other hand, she works with youth, at-risk youth that come through her hospital. There's a large amount of very good studies that support the idea that the brain of a teenager is subject to impulse. And again, there's stuff that we don't even know because if Karmelo Anthony would have been subjected to all of the tests and the battery testing and everything, there could be things we don't even know about or understand that could have absolutely contributed to the impulsive decision he made in that moment. And his defense never gave us the chance to understand that, because I don't think his defense really understood it. And I don't think his defense attorney really understood it. And I think his defense attorney, I don't know. I don't think he did a very good job for him. Now, let's go over to witnesses, what they said. Witness 1 is his 16-year-old teammate. He testifies Anthony refused to leave the private team space. He warned he had something in his bag. Witness 2 is an 18-year-old graduate who was there that day. He testifies Metcalf did not believe Anthony was armed. You don't have anything in that backpack, it's Frisco. Defense cross-examination on witness 2 is forced to admit to the jury that he previously told police Anthony's initial remarks sounded like a joke. Okay? Exactly what I said. Okay? Exactly what I said what this is. This is not a cold-blooded killer trying to provoke a kid. This is a kid who's being confronted, who's being called out, who's looking weak in front of all these people, and he's attempting to de-escalate a situation in a way that he's really not thinking through where this leads to. It's something I've said to my sons. Well, when you say something like that, where do you think this goes? And what happens if you actually end up in a scenario where the individual comes over to you? Well, we just found out with Karmelo Anthony what that looks like. And clearly, Austin Metcalf did not respect what Karmelo Anthony said. Witness 3 says he's a 17-year-old, he's a running back on the football team. He testifies that Anthony actively baited Metcalf. Now, this is where the jury, essentially where they hung their hat on. Touch me and see what happens. Metcalf responds, dude, I'm not going to fight you at a track meet. Okay? Well, my question with that is, and this is an interesting scenario, right? This guy comes in and says this, that if he wasn't going to fight him, then why the hell did Metcalf go over to him and touch him? Because it's very clear that Metcalf touched him first. So if that's true, then why did Metcalf go over to him? So which tells you that this witness right here is clearly a biased individual. But what he does say, and what the jury obviously adopted out of his testimony, is the part that says, touch me and see what happened. And that, again, I say, that is actually, if taken from the minds of a teenager, of a 16-year-old, what sounds like active baiting is actually an attempt to de-escalate by a idiot teenager who is more worried about protecting themselves, or should I say, more concerned about looking weak in front of their peers instead of actually trying to de-escalate the situation properly and just walk away from it and say, hey man, leave me alone, I'm not leaving your tent. Witness 4, Liberty High School athlete. He's standing outside the tent in the drizzle, and he hears Anthony state, if you want me to move, you're going to have to move me. So, again, the prosecution postures these things as provocation. They're not provocation. The problem we have here is we don't clearly have an honest listening here, because what we have is a prosecutor who wants to get to red rum. He wants to get to intent. He wants to get to an intentional act. What we're hearing here is not provocation from Anthony. This is provocation from Austin Metcalf. And everyone who hears this differently than that isn't honestly listening to what's happening here, and isn't listening to this in the way that teenagers communicate. Because Austin Metcalf is clearly the aggressor here. Now, he gets killed, and everybody remembers everything in a different light. And the adults in the room decide to apply different standards to what is actually being said. But what Anthony, if you're listening to this honestly, Anthony's the one under verbal attack here. He's being threatened. He's being told to leave. And these students who were upset about his presence were choosing to handle this on their own. Because the responsibility of those students was to go to a teacher and say, we have someone here who's not authorized. Please talk to them. Please remove them. It was not go get the biggest guy in the room to come over and physically remove him. And that's how you get to this situation. Now, the defense successfully uses diagrams to force witnesses to admit the physical posturing heavily favored the standing Metcalf. What they should have been doing was using their cross-examination to better understand what these things meant in the context of teenage communication. But see, they didn't do that. Because to them, they were just trying to go around all of this, and they were essentially saying, okay, yeah, he was baiting him, but, you know, he was being threatened, he was bigger. That's not how this should have been handled. This was handled poorly by the defense. This was not handled in a way by the defense attorneys who I believe believed in their client. And clearly they didn't believe in their client because they put the client on the witness stand. So where they found these defense attorneys at, I have no idea. Like I said, I stand by the idea. He got rid of a YouTube account. He should have. I mean, I don't think, anybody that goes to him in the future, go to him and pay him with, I mean, you've seen what his work is, right? But this is highly disturbing to see the way this played out. So here's what we have. Witness 5. So this is what the state essentially puts before the jury. The warning. Witness 5 sees Anthony's hand buried in his backpack. The vein in Anthony's arm is bulging, indicating a tight grip on an unseen object. And I believe witness 5 is, okay, so that's a witness we have. So witness 5. Witness 5 stands up, fearing a fight. Metcalf leans in, uses 2 hands to physically touch and move Anthony's shoulder. The physical contact knocks the seated Anthony backwards. This is witness 5, who has a direct sight line, okay? And once you apply this to what's seen in the video that we will eventually watch, the physical contact knocks the seated Anthony backward. Anthony's hand emerges from the bag, and the fatal strike occurs in a split second. So, again, provocation. The only way the state gets to an intentional act, and this is why it's so upsetting to me, is that the jury had to essentially say that he gave up his right to stand your ground. He gave up his right to react to what Alston Metcalf was doing because he had provoked it. Yet that's not what's happening here. Yes, he said some language that could be interpreted as provocative language. What he was really doing was he was saying, don't do this, get away from me. And he needed Alston Metcalf because in his mind, he can't look weak. So he's telling Alston Metcalf, get back, stay away from me, and leave me alone. And he's doing it in a way that saves face. Alston Metcalf essentially says, I could go get a teacher. I'm not going to do that. No, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to tell you that I absolutely am going to punk you in front of all these people. I think you're lying, and Alston Metcalf was the aggressor. He was the provocateur here, okay? He overrode. He didn't respect the message that was being sent to Karmelo Anthony. And the message was not, come over here and get stabbed. It was, leave me alone and quit messing with me. But it was said in a way that allowed Karmelo Anthony to save face. And then Alston Metcalf comes over and touches him and physically intimidates him and actually puts his hands on him. And the only question that should have been at hand in that jury room was the reaction. The reaction. Does self-defense stand in this case? And it should have been a judgment of looking at comparing the force used. Was it okay at that moment to pull a knife out and stab him? And what was his intent when he did so? Because, again, remember, the lesser says that he stabs Alston Metcalf and doesn't think it's going to cause death. It's more of, get away. Now, the state's going to say he jams that thing in, and again, we haven't got to that point yet, but they're going to say he actually had to press it in. What I'm going to tell you, again, this is again where the defense, in order to accurately reflect everything and to put it through, has to explain how in that moment, when he's doing this, his mind is not consciously understanding what it's doing in a sense that intent is forming. In other words, he's not saying, I'm jamming this in. He's just, get away from me, and he's pushing through, right? But he's not pushing through it, let me kill him. He's just pushing through like, Alston Metcalf is coming. He's pushing back. Yes, it's brutal. Yes, it's terrible. Yes, he's having to break through the bone or whatever he had to do. But he doesn't know where he's striking. He's not some trained knife artist. He's just striking the kid to hurt the kid. But the question is, when he struck the kid, did he strike the kid thinking, I'm killing the kid? Or did he strike the kid like, get back. Oh, now you're stabbed. All right, buddy, you're cut up. I'm leaving. I'm getting the hell out of here. And he did it to give him enough space. Now, here's the problem. It all comes back to it. He had to testify. He had to discuss this. He had to put his account on the record. So then he could bring in everybody else to interpret that account for the jury. And he didn't do that because his ridiculously inept attorneys told him not to. He's a 17-year-old kid, and I understand he made that decision, but he's 17 years old. He is relying on the adults in the room. He is relying on everyone. And by the accounts of his parents and everyone around him, he decided to go with what his attorney told him, and obviously we saw the results of it. But witness 5 is the eyewitness that sees all of this. Now, again, we just talked about this, the proportionality dilemma. What is a lineman move? Because apparently the witness testified that there was a lineman move. The state's framing is that there was a moderate touch to the shoulder, a nonviolent attempt to guide an intruder out. And again, remember, the state's idea here is he's an intruder. Metcalf is essentially trying to, what? Very nicely guide Mr. Anthony out. That's ridiculous. That's not what's happening. But apparently the jury adopted this. Eyewitness authority, two-handed punch. The defense framing calls it an upward and inward lineman move that knocks the seated Anthony back. But here's the problem. The defense can call it whatever it is, and they can question whatever it is, but that's not evidence. What's evidence is when their client gets on the stand and says, this is what he did to me, and this is what it did to me, and this is what I did in response. So the defense ridiculously never puts this evidence on because the only person that can really put this evidence on is their client. Because it's very clear, it should have been very clear, that the individuals that are testifying for the state in this case, and then the ones that, well, we haven't got the defense case yet, but the ones that testified for the state in this case were not speaking in a very favorable terms for Mr. Anthony. So the question becomes, did a physical displacement by a 180-pound athlete against a 130-pound seated teen legally justify the deployment of a 3.5-inch blade? Again, like I said, proportionality of lineman move, physical touch, knife, and what was it? And the only person who could really come in, because the other one person is dead, the only person who could come into this equation and really speak to these events was Karmelo Anthony. And I'm telling you, that jury, I believe, would have had a different perspective on everything if he would have gotten on that witness stand. And you cannot, in the circumstances of this case, in a case like this, you cannot not have the client testify. It just doesn't work. And it didn't work. Now, the Frisco bubble, psychological threat lag. So we have suburban safety expectation. We're in Frisco. Belief that the weapon-related violence is non-existent in school events. The threat lag, the delayed cognitive recognition of a lethal threat leading larger athletes to physically engage a smaller armed defendant instead of retreating. And overt verbal physical warnings. Touch me and see what happens. Bulging vein, hidden hand. Proves Anthony brought the strategic effect of the lag. The state says it proves Anthony brought unprecedented violence to a safe space. The defense says it explains why Metcalf felt emboldened to quarter and push an armed team. Okay? I say that yes, that is all relevant, but it's still not even pressing into the real area of this, which is the threat is not even really a threat. It's a misguided attempt at de-escalation. Again, that needed to have been interpreted, but it can't be interpreted until Karmelo Anthony takes the stand and puts it into the record as evidence. What's in evidence? What's in evidence is what the state puts in and how the state puts it in. And the defense can question, but defense questions are not evidence. What's evidence is their client's words. And then any other stuff they want to put on that helps explain the account that their client puts on the record. And then the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that their client acted intentionally with intent, with the intent to provoke, with the intent to get this kid to come over so he could stab him. And I don't believe if Karmelo Anthony would have testified that would have even had a chance of standing tall. So the day ends at 5:05 p.m. Judge Roach dismisses the jury for today, and he schedules a special session for Saturday, June 6th. At this particular point, the state's built a narrative of unprovoked, disproportionate violence. The defense is planted to see the size disparity in a panicked, cornered teen. So where we are at right now is the next day, when we get there to day 3, we will get to hear more. And again, this is going to be where the state will rest and shock everybody, and the defense will then put on a part of their case. All right, so here we are, guys. So I've decided, given what we just heard, we're going to watch, it's 10 minutes long. We're going to watch, essentially, it's going to be the video of what occurred, and it will be a video also partially of Karmelo Anthony's arrest. So with that said, this is how we'll end today's session. Let's watch. And this is when I do believe this is showing Austin Metcalf's arrival. There he is. And that shows his arrival to the stadium. And then you're going to see the stadium here. And again, the good news is this doesn't actually show anything, any actual violence. So that's good because it's so far away and it's grainy. Now, this is going to also show here, there's the tents. This is from the press box. I do believe this will show, if I'm not mistaken, this shows Karmelo Anthony's arrival. There he is right there, backpack, sweatshirt, and you see him walking across. And there he is right there. So you see him walking across, and then you're going to see everything that happens is over here. So now you need to pay attention to over here. There he is walking up and in. I do believe that's him, if I'm not mistaken. But everything is over there, right over here. So let's make sure we got this framed correctly. It's important that we could see everything over here in this quadrant right here, this area right here. And again, keeping in mind all of the testimony that was heard today, that we heard, and I'll move myself over because that will, for this purpose, all of the testimony that we heard today, okay, all of the accounts that we heard today. This is an account of what what we saw, of what we heard in real life, and it's over in this area is where you want to pay attention to. That's where everything's going on. There he is. So it all just happened right there. So let's just take one moment right here, and we will go back. That is him fleeing. Now, let's go back and just rewind this back a bit. All right, so let's watch, and let's do this. We are going to try to zoom in as much as we can on this little area right here and watch what's going on. So let's replay the tape. And here's the area that we want to focus on. Okay, so let's hit play on it and watch what's going on up here. There you can see this is where all the activity is, right over here. This is where you need to be keeping a close watchful eye of what's happening. And I want you to watch right here. This is where the interaction occurs. There it is, right there, right in there. And Karmelo Anthony shoots right up there. So you can see, let's go back, right here. You're going to see, there it is. They come together, and he shoots up. So you can see the confrontation. Karmelo Anthony is surrounded by people. Okay, now again, I'm not saying that, they're all getting violent, but what we've heard, remember, Karmelo Anthony is touched first. There it is. And he then stabs and he flees. Does that look like someone who just attempted to kill someone, or does that look like someone who made who did something to get away from a situation? Now we're watching him flee the scene. And there he is. And you can see him running and running. And people are pursuing. It looks like they're pursuing him. And then he slows down and starts walking. All right. All right, so I wanted to show that part to you, okay? Because that's what we just heard testimony on, okay? That's what we heard the testimony on. The rest of it is not necessarily, important in terms of watching run away. The next part I want to see is, I don't think I have in this part. No, this is not where I have. I'm going to find and see if I can find the actual body cam footage. It's not in that video of it. I believe it is, hold on here. Let's see here. Let me see if I can find it. I've got to find it. I don't have that readily up and available, but that's not that important because I've told you what it said. We will watch that. There will, like I said, in post-trial analysis, when we get into analyzing this deep proposed trial, we will go through these things that have been released post-trial and where things stand and all that. But I wanted to play that because at least that part of the press box film, because we just saw the testimony. And I want you to think of the testimony you heard. And I want you to think of what you just saw. And then I want you to think to yourself, does this look like a young man who was attempting to provoke someone to come over so he could brutally stab them to death? Or does this look like a scenario where something escalated, he makes a horrible decision in dealing with it, clearly, by stabbing the kid? And again, at that point, I believe this should have been a proportionality case. Was the use of force proportional to what was coming his way? And if the jury didn't feel it was, then it should have been put somewhere on that range. And I think the appropriate range is, in my opinion, is the defense could have gotten it to a stage, which again, remember, the defense didn't even get the lesser on the table. The judge refused to put it on because he said there was nothing there to suggest that Karmelo Anthony didn't understand that his actions wouldn't have caused death. And the reason for that is because his stupid attorneys didn't advise him to testify. Now, they can't make him testify, and if Karmelo Anthony truly didn't want to testify, well, that's great, but I don't believe that young man. If they would have said, we're going to prepare you, get on the stand and tell the story, son, and let out all your emotions and tell them exactly what happened, he would have testified. And if he would have testified, Karmelo Anthony, I think, would have been in a far different position today than where he was at, than where he is at. And I think, again, in fairness to the situation, this is a horrible situation. And I feel for Alston Metcalf's family because he did not deserve to die. I feel for Karmelo Anthony's family because I don't think he deserves 35 years. And I think we're in a scenario here where both families have gotten things. Now, the conduct of the way things were handled, I don't know who should shoulder the blame for that. I don't know who made a decision to hire the attorney. Again, those are things I don't know. Okay, I don't know. But what I do know is that this attorney that was involved in this case did not give Karmelo Anthony the best defense he could have been given. And that is concerning for me. So with that, guys, we end day 2. Weekly, we will be coming out with these. I believe it's 5 days. So over the next 3 weeks, we will finish this trial. And then I will determine, like I said, how much post-trial we do it. But we will be putting these out, taking you inside the courtroom. And again, if you're a member, you have access to all of the notebook features right now. You can go in, you can interact, you can talk, you can ask questions. And I would encourage you to do so, because I think that if you go in and interact at this, with this and ask the right questions and get into all of this and get into what happened, I think you're going to be enlightened in a way you might not be, right? You might not be if you just follow what the media is telling you, because what the media is telling you is definitely not the whole story here. If you follow either side, I think you're getting, again, emotional versions of events that are colored by the emotion of loss. One side, the loss of their son because he's dead. The other, the loss of their son because he's going to do 35 years in prison, 17 years he'll be eligible for parole. But anybody who knows the Texas system knows that parole is not something you get. And I don't think this is necessarily an exception case where suddenly he's going to walk out and get parole. Yes, Karmelo Anthony will have a life beyond prison based on if he lives long enough to do that. But his life beyond prison is going to be far different than it would have been if he never went to prison. Because one thing I can tell you about prison is it changes a person, and it changes the entire trajectory of life. And the experiences you have, the people you're around, and everything that could have happened. And he will have lost so much of things. Now, Austin Metcalf has lost all of it. So, again, there is not a winner here. There is not a winner here in this situation. And I think that it's sad because what we've also lost, there's a third loss here, and that is understanding what needs to be done differently next time in a clear way that can actually move things forward and help prevent things like this from occurring. Because if we just stop where it's at right now, and we truly stop at and say, oh yeah, he entered there to provoke somebody with a concealed weapon in a book bag, and we actually believe that, again, it'll happen again. If we go forward and we just say, yeah, he was completely right, and he used his force in the way he did, and he killed this young man, let him off and walk free, I don't think that's the right place to stop. There's a place in between where we have to understand that there were two kids that came together. Both of them handled this incorrectly. There was a lot of other kids that handled this incorrectly. There were bystanders that could have got a teacher, and there were moments and off-ramps along this way that this is correctly and honestly understood. This doesn't happen again. But if it stands the way it is today, it will, and we will be back here again, and this will not, and race is not one of them. Race should be not even in this equation, because I don't believe either of those boys were seeing race, okay? And race is being interjected by a lot of outside forces. But in that tent, in that moment, there was one thing. It was young, teenage, testosterone-driven, one-upsmanship that led to this. And an unfortunate decision that the knife was in the book bag to begin with, which we still don't know why it was. And then we're here, where two young men's lives are destroyed and altered forever. One dead, one in prison, and it's really sad. But we will continue walking through this case as we reach to day 3, the special session that occurred on Saturday, on a Saturday, a 9-hour marathon session, and we will get to that and go through that and break that down for you, and of course, bring it all for you. So in the meantime, let me know your thoughts on where you, after day 2, where do you stand? Have you heard anything? Have you seen anything? Is anything you've heard so far, days 1 and day 2, changed how you felt about the case, strengthened how you felt about the case? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear from you. And until we talk again, guys, keep watching, because justice always works better when we watch. I'll talk to you soon.
But the lesson stayed. He fought every demon he had, and he still came back. Down in Martinsburg, the city's getting cold. Dad was on the corner with a story untold. Battle every morning, but he still got out. Helped another stranger, made another route. The bottle was a teacher, but he never won. He poured the coffee, opened up the lotto one, and one became 100 and 100 became more. Even when his body couldn't carry what he bore. And they asked me why he fought so hard. Tell them it was love. And they asked me how he kept the law. Tell them it was love. He was fighting, still fighting demons no one saw. He was teaching, still teaching, even broken on the floor. Now the addictions let him go, and the legacy keeps the flow. Daddy, you can rest at last. I'm carrying the future, not the past. I had my own dark season, knew the heavy chains, inherited the hunger and the fire in the veins. Watched him in the mirror, same eyes looking back. Took me years to figure out which road I had to track. Got to the other side of it, sober and awake. Picked up the camera, picked the doctrine in the wake. Every day I'm winning is another day he wins. Every video I post, that's where the legacy begins. And they ask me why I keep the fight. Tell them it was love. And they ask me how I see the light. Tell them it was love. I was fighting, still fighting demons no one saw. Now I'm teaching, still teaching what he taught me through the door. And the addiction had to fall, 'cause the legacy, I grew it all. Daddy, you can rest at last. I'm carrying the future, not the past. 105,000 strong now. Every one of them a soul that he would have helped somehow. You're not gone. You're not gone. You're not gone. You're in every word I say, in every viewer that I save, in every dream that I face. Daddy, you're still in this place. Oh, Daddy, you're still in this place. Still fighting demons no one saw. Now we're teaching, still teaching through the open coffee shop door. And the addiction had to go, 'cause the legacy is the show. Daddy, you can rest at last. I'm carrying the future, not the past. The work goes